If you've seen any of my videos about Series 1 to 4, you might have noticed the exclusion of any of the Christmas specials in my rankings, and barely a word on them in the retrospectives. Although they're often included with their appropriate series on streaming platforms and in DVD box sets, I've decided to cover them here in a separate video, starting with those from the Russell T Davies era. The main reason for this decision is that the context and requirements of these specials are usually different to most regular episodes. Doctor Who has always been a family show, and the Davies era was particularly accessible to a casual audience, but the Christmas specials are even more beholden to this rule. For the most part, they have to be self-contained pieces of entertainment that can be enjoyed by a wide range of ages. The Christmas TV schedule is a battleground, and such a prime-time spot needs to be filled by something that can work for kids, parents, even grandparents, able to placate anyone who might be sat in front of the telly after having eaten far too much food. A series might have a story arc, or a consistent tone, or a specific character journey that helps make otherwise unrelated episodes feel like part of a cohesive whole. But these specials often have to work as singular pieces of light entertainment to suit an expanded audience. I still wanted to cover them though, and given the last video was about Series 4, now seemed like a good time to do so. As is the case with the series retrospectives, I want to focus on what the specials do, what defines them, and how successfully they manage to fulfill the requirements of a Doctor Who special, rather than simply telling you which ones I prefer. This retrospective will focus on all the specials from Russell's first run as showrunner, from The Christmas Invasion to The End of Time, Part 2. I know I just said all that stuff about the specials having to work for a much broader audience, and they do, but it is interesting how connected the first two Christmas specials are to their preceding series finales. Granted, this is somewhat accidental. With Eccleston leaving at the end of Series 1, the Christmas Invasion was forced to be a post-regeneration story. I have a feeling that The Runaway Bride was less affected by unexpected circumstances, but it still revolves heavily around the departure of Billie Piper from Doomsday. Although The Christmas Invasion is very much linked to the episode that aired before it, I feel like you can still see the attempt to appeal to a broader audience in its content. A noticeable chunk of the story is simply, this is how Rose and her family are doing Christmas. She goes shopping with Mickey, Jackie complains on the phone about Rose turning up unannounced, and the episode ends with them all sitting down to a nice Christmas dinner. The plot feels functional more than anything else, and the Sycorax plan is quite underdeveloped, although visually they are a very interesting alien species. It almost feels like the story was written to give a reason to depict killer Christmas trees and robot Santas, like the image came first. The idea of Rose, Jackie, Mickey and the Doctor fighting a killer Christmas tree on the Powell estate could be a lot of fun if you lent into the cheesiness of the premise. Even in the episode we got, this idea makes for a great set piece, but I've almost forgotten it by the time we're on the Sycorax ship. I think if Eccleston had stayed, then I wouldn't have minded a story where he just hangs out with the Tyler family for Christmas. Think Boomtown, just at Christmas and in London. But having to establish a new Doctor and basically explain the post-regeneration process to an audience who might never have seen it before, alongside all of the festive stuff, leaves the episode feeling a bit rushed. There's lots going on, but none of it is given enough development. This is understandable given the time constraints of a single episode, but once it's finished, I'm usually left feeling a bit empty. The Christmas Invasion is a necessary link between Series 1 and 2, but I do think it has the unfortunate side effect of blunting Tennant's arrival. Not only is he hardly in it, but because it's also a Christmas story, they have to essentially reintroduce him in New Earth. I'm not commenting on the quality of the Christmas Invasion, but I do think that when viewed alongside every other post-regeneration story of the revival, it feels the least definitive. By comparison, The Runaway Bride is less defined by the events of the preceding finale. The Doctor is getting over the loss of Rose, and it's still quite raw, but it's a less intrusive hangover than had been the case with the brand new Doctor in The Christmas Invasion. The Runaway Bride feels like a rough template for a lot of Christmas specials going forward. We get introduced to a new side character early on, and over the course of the episode the Doctor helps them with their problem and they become friends in the process. It's a very basic setup, which might explain why a lot of the specials that utilise it are the ones that feel the most by the numbers. Think The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, or The Return of Dr. Mysterio. All of these cookie-cutter specials have some small detail or gimmick to them, and your opinion on the episode will likely depend on how much you enjoy this element. For The Runaway Bride, the draw is probably the casting of Catherine Tate, and while this version of Donna is somewhat embryonic, the chemistry between Tate and Tennant is already strong enough to make the character work. The first two specials had to deal with the fallout from their preceding episodes, and The End of Time is obviously a regeneration story, which leaves Voyage of the Damned and The Next Doctor as the only Christmas specials without an ulterior motive, so to speak. I know that the title of The Next Doctor is playing on the speculation of Tennant's upcoming replacement, but the story isn't really about that. If we were judging the Christmas specials on their suitability to their target audience, then I think Voyage of the Damned would probably be the most successful of the bunch. It doesn't feel very festive, but it does feel like the kind of big-budget, cheesy disaster movie that you might watch around Christmas time. It even has a gratuitous all-star cast. Voyage of the Damned is still the most viewed episode of the revival series in the UK, and that doesn't surprise me at all. It's basically Titanic in space, with a mix of likeable characters and pantomime villains. It has some big heroic moments, a bittersweet ending, and a glossy look that makes the whole thing feel very expensive. I don't think the episode is anything special, but I can't imagine anyone watching it and completely hating it either. If this was the only episode of Doctor Who you saw in 2007, then I can imagine you having a good time with it. For fans of the show, though, it might have felt like another insubstantial special. I don't want to be too harsh on these stories, because I can imagine it's a hard balance to get right. The plot can't be anything too complicated, the episode needs to be accessible to families simply looking for some fun Christmas entertainment, but it still needs to be a faithful instalment for fans of the show. It's also worth acknowledging that watching these episodes back is a different experience to watching them on Christmas Day, when you might be more likely to forgive an episode's flaws because it's Christmas. With this in mind, I want to praise The Next Doctor. I think it's the Christmas special that best understands this balance, being an interesting story but also feeling particularly Christmassy. A large part of this is, of course, the Victorian setting. Seeing Jackson Lake or Miss Hartigan walking around London in the snow feels like something straight out of a Dickens novel. Because the Victorian idea of Christmas is so pervasive in our conception of what a traditional Christmas looks like, the episode can basically do whatever it wants and still feel authentically festive by the end. The ending is a definite flaw, and I can see how the plot might be a bit too technical and lore-heavy for some, but I also think that the Cybermen are recognisable enough in pop culture to seem familiar to a casual audience. I suppose if you wanted an easier way to strike a balance between being an enjoyable bit of Christmas telly and a satisfying Doctor Who episode, you could just split the story into two parts, as is the case with The End of Time, the final special of the Davies era. In theory, this strategy is quite clever. Part 1 aired on Christmas Day and is easily the lighter of the two stories, fine for a setup episode. Having been freed from the constraints of the Christmas Day slot, Part 2 is able to be more dramatic and story-focused. In this way, The End of Time can essentially have its Christmas cake and eat it too. In practice though, I do think it leaves Part 1 feeling noticeably empty. The episode has a solid build up to the cliffhanger, don't get me wrong, but there's also lots of hanging around, and comedic interactions that aren't as strong as those in Series 4 in my opinion. I think the extended runtime only makes this worse. 60 minutes feels a lot longer when there are scenes that could so easily be cut. I've said before that I don't mind a weak first part if it leads to a strong second part, and that's still true of this story. However silly the Master's plan is, Part 2 uses it to generate some of the strongest character moments in the entire show. Tennant's conversation with Wilf on the Vinvoce ship brings me to tears every time I see it, and Sim's redemption at the end makes me want to punch the air. I think the biggest thing about The End of Time, though, is the precedent it sets, having the Doctor's regeneration be a big event, the kind reserved for a special. Of the 4 main regenerations we've had since The End of Time, 3 of them came at the end of specials designed for this purpose, which acted as swan songs for their particular incarnation. I'm not saying this is inherently a bad thing. The quality of the story is the most important part of a regeneration, whether it's a special, a series finale, or whatever else. But it's clear that Tennant's regeneration, not Eccleston's, was the template for those that followed. Alongside the multiple Christmas and New Year specials of the Davies era, there were also 2 standalone specials that aired before Tennant's final story, Planet of the Dead and The Waters of Mars. Planet of the Dead was ostensibly an Easter special, but aside from the Doctor eating an Easter egg before the titles, the holiday marketing has no impact on the plot of the episode. I wonder if either of these stories were affected by a sense of panic, or maybe just novelty, at the need to write 2 standalone stories without the feel-good grace of Christmas to make up for any deficiencies, or the variety of a series structure to allow for more creative storytelling. In a series, you have the scope to try a strange idea every now and then, because if it doesn't work, you've got a few bread-and-butter stories to make up for it. Whether it's 10, 12, or 13 episodes, there's a diversity to them that ensures there's something for everyone to enjoy. You can make an odd experimental episode like Blink or Sleep No More, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't matter, because the next episode will likely be something completely different. It's harder to do this with a special because for the audience, it's the only Doctor Who they're getting for several months. It needs to be something you know people will enjoy because there won't be a palate cleanser the week after if they don't. With this in mind, I don't think it's surprising that both these specials feel formulaic, but what's interesting is that they feel formulaic in completely different ways. Planet of the Dead is one of the most forgettable episodes of the show. A bus goes through a portal and lands in a desert. The episode was partly filmed in Dubai, which feels like an odd choice of episode to splurge on an extravagant location. The desert looks great, it's really big and desolate, which is nice, but because it's still a desert, it's also quite boring to look at. It's a bit like painting a wall white, but using really expensive paint. The Waters of Mars is a Base Under Siege episode, but it does this extremely well. Instead of feeling forgettable, it feels like a superlative example of this specific genre. It's the Doctor and a small group of characters facing off against an ever-increasing threat. That's not to say it does nothing original. It's essentially a historical story, only instead of featuring an important figure from the past, it creates a figure who is important in the future and treats them like a historical celebrity. That's a really cool idea, basically a follow-up to the dilemma of the fires of Pompeii, and it fits well within the solid Base Under Siege formula. For a single standalone episode of Doctor Who with no ties to any series or seasonal holiday, this choice of story is a great one. It might be easy to overlook it in a series, but when viewed on its own, it's a great piece of sci-fi horror, a warm, lovingly made example of a very specific type of Doctor Who story. I think I've mentioned the Waters of Mars in every retrospective video since Series 2 because it contains that incredible final scene with Tennant and basically recontextualizes his entire run, making his occasional arrogance feel meaningful and leading to what seems like a full-on existential crisis. It's some of the best character work for any incarnation of the Doctor, and alongside the end of time, it makes the fate of Tennant's character one of the most narratively satisfying for any Doctor, irrespective of the quality of the episode itself. Overall, the Davies era specials are a bit of a mixed bag for me. I remember watching the later ones as a kid when they aired, and I'm very familiar with all the others having gone back to them around that time, but I don't think many of them are worth revisiting now. If I were to choose a Doctor Who Christmas special to watch this Christmas, I would probably ignore a fair few of these. A lot of them feel insubstantial. It's easy to get swept up in Voyage of the Damned, for example, but the amount of filler leaves me cold by the end. There are a few gems in the bunch, but I'm afraid you'll have to wait a bit longer to hear my full opinion on them. I will do a ranking video for these episodes, but I've decided to wait until I've covered all the specials and do one big list ranking all of them from worst to best. That video is obviously a way off, but in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this retrospective of the first era of Doctor Who specials, and please feel free to let me know your thoughts on the episodes I covered. I've got another big finish video that I want to do after this one, but following that, I will be covering the Matt Smith era, starting with a retrospective of Series 5, so stay tuned for that one coming soon. Until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.